The day my boss fired me without warning, he smiled like he was doing me a favor, and for a few seconds I thought maybe he actually believed that. 14 years of my life poured into this company. 14 years of 4 a.m. phone calls, late-night troubleshooting, weekends swallowed by deadlines. And he ended it with a smile and the words, "It's just business, Marcus. Just business." Like the mortgage waiting for me at home was business. Like my son's college plans were business. Like the identity I had built day by day until I could barely separate myself from the machines I kept alive was just another number in a spreadsheet. He said it quickly, efficiently, while Karen from HR pushed a folder across the table and asked for my badge. That was the moment it became real. Not a review, not a warning, just the edge of the cliff under my feet. I kept my hands flat on the table because they were trembling, not from fear, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid, but from anger that burned so hot I thought the skin on my palms would blister. "After 14 years?" I asked, and I saw the flicker in his eyes, the small flinch of guilt he tried to cover with another smooth smile. "We need to reduce costs," he said. "Your salary doesn't align with the company's direction." That was the line. My salary didn't align. Not my work, not my record, not the patents with my name on them, not the system still running because I refused to cut corners. Just a line in a budget, a line he could erase with a pen stroke. Karen leaned in with that careful tone HR people practice, the one meant to sound like empathy but taste like cardboard. "You'll receive a severance package," she said. "And outplacement support, if you'd like." Outplacement support, as if finding another job at 45 in an industry that eats its veterans alive was just a matter of clicking a few job postings. I stared at the folder, then looked up at my boss and said, "Does the board know what they just lost?" He gave me a patient look, the kind managers reserve for employees they think are being dramatic. "We'll manage, Marcus. Everyone's replaceable." That was when I smiled for the first time since stepping into that room. It wasn't the smile he expected. It wasn't defeat. It was the smile of a man who knew something he didn't. Because what my boss didn't understand, what he had never bothered to notice in all his time pretending to lead, was that some contracts don't treat people as replaceable. Some contracts name the individual, not the role. And my name sat on half a dozen city agreements like a keystone, holding everything above it together. If you remove the keystone, the arch collapses. And I was already picturing the collapse. I signed the receipt of paperwork, but not the non-disparagement clause, sliding the folder back without meeting Karen's eyes. My boss raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the security guard waiting in the hallway would be the last thing standing between me and a quiet exit. But I was already thinking about the sealed envelope sitting in my desk drawer, the one I'd prepared months earlier after seeing too many suspicious adjustments in our safety reports. I hadn't wanted to use it. I had hoped the company would self-correct. But sometimes you only know how crooked a wall is when it finally falls. Carrying the cardboard box with my thermos, the framed photo of my family, and a stack of worn notebooks filled with sketches and formulas, I walked past desks that had once been my second home. Colleagues looked up, some with pity, some with fear, none daring to speak. Only Sophia from compliance whispered as I passed, "They're making a mistake." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, colder, charged with possibility and vengeance in equal measure. That evening at home, Claire saw the box in my arms and froze. "Marcus? What happened?" she asked, voice tight. I put the box on the counter, exhaled slowly, and told her. She sat down hard on the chair, pressing a hand to her forehead. 14 years, she whispered. "And they didn't even warn you?" I shook my head. "But don't worry," I said, meeting her eyes. "They think I'm finished. They don't know I hold the one thing they can't buy back." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer, not yet. Because explaining it too soon would make it real, and I wanted to savor the moment when my boss realized what he had done, when he saw that the man he had dismissed as expendable had left behind a fuse already burning toward his empire. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I understood something that steadied me. Revenge didn't need to be loud or violent. It just needed to be precise. The first shockwave hit faster than I expected. Less than 24 hours after I'd been escorted out, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Clearwater Council has suspended remote ops. Legal is panicking. Victor is blaming you." Victor was the COO, a man who once praised me as the backbone of operations, but now, with me gone, would paint me as the saboteur. I read the text twice, then tucked the phone into my pocket, strangely calm. They were unraveling exactly as I knew they would. That afternoon, while I sat at the kitchen table with coffee gone cold, my wife Claire pressed me for answers. "I still don't understand," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "How does firing one person cause a city to shut down their contract? That doesn't even make sense, Marcus." I leaned back, rubbed my temples, and tried to put it simply. Because the contracts name me, Claire. Not my position. Me. I'm the one legally responsible for the attestations, for the compliance reports, for the safety signatures. They can't just swap my name out like changing batteries in a remote. Her eyes widened, the reality sinking in. So they fired the one person the cities actually trust? I nodded. And now they're about to learn what that means. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I had been dreading. "But what about us? Our mortgage? Lucas's college fund. You've got principals, Marcus, but we have bills." I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "I didn't pick this fight. But if I walk away now, we lose everything anyway. At least this way, they'll answer for what they've done." By Thursday morning, the storm gathered. The State Oversight Board had scheduled an unannounced visit to Bayfield's control center, and I knew what they would find. Incomplete logs, manipulated incident reports, and a 15-minute gap in telemetry that Victor had sworn never happened. I had copies of those logs sealed and time-stamped, couriered to the board the week before my firing. It was only a matter of time before the questions reached a pitch no smooth-talking executive could answer. The company responded exactly as I predicted. They started trying to smear me. A former colleague forwarded me an internal email, Thomas Confidential, in which Victor accused me of withholding documentation and failing to properly transfer compliance responsibilities. Reading it, I laughed bitterly. They were rewriting history already, painting me as careless, maybe even malicious. But what Victor didn't know was that every single one of my memos had been CC'd to the board's audit chair, along with my refusal to approve the falsified variance pathway. I hadn't just protected myself. I had made myself untouchable. Still, the pressure at home grew heavier by the hour. My son Lucas came home from school with questions he didn't know how to ask. He dropped his backpack by the door, hovered in the kitchen, and finally said, "Mom says you're not working anymore. Did you do something wrong?" I crouched down, looked him in the eye, and answered as carefully as I could. "No, buddy, I didn't do anything wrong. But sometimes when you stand up for what's right, people who cut corners don't like it. That's what happened to me." He nodded slowly, absorbing it in that quiet way kids do when they're deciding whether or not to believe you. Then he said, "So what happens now?" I smiled, though my stomach was in knots. "Now we wait. And we see what happens when the T. Eleanor comes out." On Friday, Sophia called me after work. Her voice was low, urgent. "Marcus, the oversight inspectors showed up this morning. It was chaos. Victor tried to talk his way through the missing logs, but they had your packet. They compared it line by line. He had nothing. They're furious." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The inspectors frowning, Victor sweating, my absence hanging in the air like a ghost they couldn't explain away. "What did they say?" I asked. "That Rivergate has 72 hours to produce a corrective action plan, or they'll suspend access in Bayfield just like Clearwater." I thanked her, but before hanging up she said something that caught me off guard. "They're blaming you, Marcus. Everyone upstairs. They're telling people you set this up to make them fail." I was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Let them. The T. Eleanor is in the logs. The T. Eleanor doesn't need my defense." That night, Claire sat beside me on the couch, her worry lines deeper than I'd ever seen. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "Scared of what they might do to you if they think you're responsible." I put an arm around her shoulders, kissed the side of her head, and whispered, "They can try whatever they want. But I know something they don't. I didn't just send the logs to the oversight board. I sent them to the board of directors too. By Monday morning, my name will be in every one of their inboxes. And when they realize Victor tried to bury a safety violation under their watch, it won't be me they come for. It'll be him." As I lay awake that night, listening to the house settle in the dark, I thought about the irony of it all. They had fired me to save money, but in their rush they had cut out the one person holding the dam together. Now the water was rising, and I could hear it pressing against the walls, waiting for the breach. By Monday morning, the company's silence was louder than any announcement they could have made. I hadn't heard from Sophia since Friday, but the news traveled in its own way. A voicemail from a former vendor who said Rivergate's leadership had gone dark on negotiations. A text from a junior engineer who wrote, "Ops locked down. No one allowed in or out of the control floor." All of it told me the same thing. Something inside the walls had broken, and they were scrambling to keep the pieces from spilling into the open. I was still nursing my first cup of coffee when an unfamiliar number flashed across my phone. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me answer. "Marcus? This is Thomas Keene," the voice said, brisk and precise. The name landed hard. Thomas Keene wasn't just anyone. He was the chair of Rivergate's board audit committee, a man whose signature was stamped on documents even the CEO hesitated to touch. For a second I wondered if this was a trap, but then he continued, "I received your packet. All of it. You're not exaggerating, are you?" I took a breath. "No, sir. Every log, every timestamp, every forged approval, it's all there. Victor asked me to bury it. I refused. Then they fired me." There was a pause, long enough for me to hear his pen scratching on paper. "I suspected as much," he said finally. "But having it in black and white is another matter. You've put us in a very serious position, Marcus. You understand that?" "I understand perfectly," I replied. "But you need to understand something too. The cities don't care about Rivergate's position. They care about safe water and reliable grids. They trusted me because I never lied to them. And now you've got executives trying to erase evidence while pretending nothing happened. If you don't act, the oversight board will. And you know what happens when they revoke a license. Contracts collapse overnight." Thomas exhaled slowly, as if the weight of those words had settled onto his shoulders. "You're right," he admitted. "And that's why I need your help. Off the record, for now. I want you to walk me through the documentation you've kept, line by line. If what you're saying is accurate, the board cannot let this continue." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell him to handle it himself, that I'd done my part. But another part, the bigger part, recognized the opportunity. This wasn't just damage control. This was leverage. "I'll walk you through it," I said carefully. "But not to cover Victor's tracks. Not to make it disappear. The T. Eleanor has to come out. That's my condition." Thomas agreed, and for the next 2 hours we spoke in detail. I explained the intrusion alerts, the missing 15 minutes of telemetry, the requests to massage the logs. I described the forged signature on a variance approval that still made my stomach twist when I thought about it. He asked sharp questions, interrupted to clarify, and I could hear the anger building in his clipped responses. By the end, his voice was tight. "This isn't just negligence. This is liability. If the state gets ahead of us, we're finished." After the call, I sat back in my chair, drained but strangely lighter. For the first time since I'd been escorted out, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. Thomas might have been motivated by survival, but he was an ally nonetheless, and allies mattered when the ground kept shifting. That evening, Claire noticed the difference in me. She set down her wine glass, studying my face. "What happened? You look less angry, almost." I smiled faintly. "I got a call from someone who matters. Someone on the board. He's seen the T. Eleanor. He wants my help." She frowned. "And you trust him?" I shrugged. "I trust his fear. Sometimes that's better than trust." She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "Just don't let them use you and throw you away again. Promise me that." I looked into her eyes and promised, though in the back of my mind I knew this wasn't about being used or not used anymore. This was about finishing what had already begun. On Tuesday morning, another surprise arrived. Sophia showed up at my door, pale but determined. "I couldn't stay," she said before I even invited her in. "They're trying to force me to sign off on corrective actions that don't exist. Victor cornered me in the lab yesterday, said if I didn't cooperate, I'd be next. So I quit." I let her in, poured her a glass of water, and listened as she vented. "They're terrified, Marcus. The inspectors keep coming back, asking for documents no one can produce. And Victor's desperate. He's pointing fingers at everyone but himself. If you hadn't kept those logs, they might have buried it all." Her presence solidified what I already suspected. The walls were closing in around Rivergate's leadership, and they were running out of people to blame. For the first time, I felt the balance of power shift. I wasn't just the fired employee with a grudge. I was the man with proof, with allies, with leverage. That night, after Sophia left, my phone buzzed with a single text from Thomas Keene. Board meeting Thursday. Bring your records. Be ready to speak. I stared at the screen, adrenaline mixing with dread. This was the turning point. If I walked into that room and laid it all out, there would be no going back. The company would never forgive me. Victor would come after me with everything he had, and my career in the industry might be finished. But the other side of that choice was clear too. Justice, accountability, the T. Eleanor finally given a voice. And lying awake once again in the dark, I realized something that chilled me even as it steeled my resolve. For 14 years I had been the quiet one, the fixer, the man who kept the gears turning without ever stepping into the spotlight. Now I was about to walk into the brightest light of my life. And the people who thought I was replaceable were about to learn just how wrong they had been. Thursday morning came heavy with gray clouds that looked like they had been pulled across the sky just for this meeting. I walked into the boardroom with a leather folder under my arm, the same one I had carried into 100 design reviews and audits over the years, except this time it wasn't full of technical schematics or safety charts. It was full of evidence. The faces around the table stiffened when I entered, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet hostility. At the head sat Thomas Keene, the man who had called me 3 days earlier. His eyes met mine with a brief nod, as if to say, "This is it." Victor was already there, pacing near the window, his tie loosened, his expression rehearsed into something between outrage and wounded pride. "I don't understand why we're entertaining this," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "He's a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. Nothing more." Thomas's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Sit down, Victor. We'll hear him out." I stood at the far end of the table, laid my folder down, and opened it. 14 years I worked here. I began, keeping my voice even. 14 years I signed my name to safety attestations because I believed in what we built. And then, 3 weeks ago, I was asked to erase 15 minutes from an incident log, to backdate approvals, to look the other way. When I refused, I was fired. But you can't erase the T. Eleanor just by erasing the person who refuses to lie. I pulled out the first document, the log with the missing 15 minutes, highlighted in yellow, time-stamped, and verified against backup copies. I slid it across the table. Then came the forged approval sheet, my name typed neatly under a traced signature that wasn't mine. Murmurs rippled around the room as the directors leaned forward, scanning the pages. Finally, I produced the email chain, Victor asking me to massage the data, my written refusal, and the silent acknowledgement from legal that had been conveniently buried until now. Victor lunged forward, slapping his palm on the table. "This is taken out of context. Every company has noise in the data. It's normal. And Marcus knows it. He's twisting this to look malicious." I looked him straight in the eye. "If it's normal, Victor, why did you need me to erase it? Why not let it stand as is?" The question hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. Thomas leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Enough. Victor, you've denied knowledge of any manipulation. These documents suggest otherwise. Marcus, continue." I laid out the city's contract clauses next, the ones that named me personally as key operator. I explained, slowly and methodically, how Clearwater had already suspended access, how Bayfield was threatening to do the same, and how each suspended contract meant millions lost in revenue and potential fines. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts carried their own weight. One director, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor, finally broke the silence. "Are you telling us that by firing you, we essentially voided compliance in half our municipal contracts?" "Yes," I answered plainly. "And you weren't informed of that risk because Victor assured you everything was under control." Victor slammed his fist again. "This is a witch hunt. He's angry we let him go, and now he's trying to burn the house down on his way out." I didn't flinch. I didn't light the fire. I just refused to cover the smoke with a curtain. The board whispered among themselves, tension building like a storm in the room. Thomas finally raised a hand to quiet them. "Marcus, if everything you say is true, why come here? Why not go straight to the state and let them destroy us?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. Because this company used to mean something to me. Because there are good people still working here, people like Sophia, who don't deserve to be collateral damage. And because I wanted to give you the chance to clean this up yourselves before the regulators finish the job. But understand this. If you try to bury it again, I won't hesitate to make every single file public. Silence pressed in. My heart pounded, but I stood steady, letting the weight of the moment sink. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. I believe him. Another director nodded. So do I. Thomas looked around the table, reading the room. Then he turned to Victor. You've had ample opportunity to explain, Victor, and I'm not satisfied. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full independent investigation. Victor's face drained of color. You can't do this. I've built this company's operations from the ground up. No, I said softly, closing my folder. You've been tearing it down from the inside. And now everyone sees it. Security was called. Victor's protests echoed down the hallway as he was escorted out, still shouting about conspiracies and vendettas. The boardroom fell into uneasy quiet, the directors staring at the documents like they were radioactive. Thomas turned back to me. Marcus, you've done the right thing here. But understand, this will not be easy. Regulators are circling, cities are furious, and the press will smell blood once this leaks. Are you prepared for that? I met his gaze, my voice steady. I've been prepared since the day they fired me. When I left the building, the sky had opened and rain poured down in sheets, cold and relentless. But I felt lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time, the T. Eleanor wasn't just mine to carry. It was out in the open, and no storm could wash it away. The morning after Victor was escorted out, the regulators arrived with their clipboards and questions that cut sharper than any accusation. I wasn't in the building, but word traveled quickly. By noon, Thomas Keene called me with a blunt proposition. Return as an interim key operator under a contractor agreement to keep the cities online. I listened in silence, then laid down conditions that would have been unthinkable months ago. Full whistleblower protection for Sophia and others who'd refused to falsify records. A public admission to the cities about the missing log and forged approval. A compliance rebuild under independent oversight. And my personal name removed from contracts within 60 days, replaced with someone properly approved. Thomas didn't argue. He only said, the board accepts. And Marcus, the CEO, is resigning. This company won't survive another cover-up. I hung up and told Claire. She studied me for a long time, then finally nodded. This time, it's on your terms. For the first time since the firing, I felt lighter. Walking back into the control room was strange. The same hum of monitors, the same smell of coffee and stress, but the atmosphere was different. Operators no longer treated the logs like background noise. They knew now that every line mattered. Sophia gave me a look of quiet gratitude as we sat together to reset alert thresholds, repair the audit trail, and draft the caretaker attestations for Clearwater and Bayfield. The signatures still mattered, but this time it was tethered to T. Eleanor. That night Victor tried one last desperate move. A text equal parts threat and apology. I didn't reply. Consequences had already caught up with him, and silence was the only answer he deserved. 2 weeks later, I stood beside a young engineer named Naomi as she signed the designation letter, making her Clearwater's key operator. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. I'm terrified, she whispered. I told her, good. Fear means you respect the responsibility. Watching her sign felt like watching a circle close. The work no longer trapped under my name, but carried forward by someone ready to bear it. News of the CEO's resignation broke quietly in the trade press. A few paragraphs about governance failure, corrective action, and leadership change. No drama, no scandal headlines, just a company stepping down from arrogance. Meanwhile, Sophia and I registered a consultancy to help cities and utilities build compliance systems that valued honesty over efficiency theater. The first call we got wasn't from a corporation, but from a city attorney. We don't want another Rivergate situation, he said. Teach us how to make contracts that protect us, not just the vendors. On my final day, Thomas intercepted me in the hallway. Rain glistened on his coat. You could stay, he offered. We'd make you VP of reliability. The title would have thrilled me a year earlier, but not now. No, I said. I need to be on the outside this time. He nodded, understanding more than he admitted. That evening, Claire and I took Lucas to the park. The air smelled of wet leaves. Lucas asked if the bad people were in jail now. I told him sometimes consequences aren't about jail. They're about losing the power you abused. He thought about that for a long moment, then nodded like it made sense. As the sun slipped behind the trees, I realized the ache inside me had shifted. Not gone, but transformed into clarity. The company hadn't collapsed. The people who needed to fall were gone. And the T. Eleanor had finally been louder than the lie. That was enough.